At 0602 hours, a Russian Mi-8 helicopter lifted off from a forward operating base in northeast Ukraine, hauling a full squad of assault troops toward Ukrainian positions. The morning flight had been routine so far, low altitude, shadowing roads, dodging radar coverage. But unknown to the Russian pilots, 3 Ukrainian FPV drone operators had been camped in the fog since 0400, their modified racing quads packing RPG warheads. In exactly 23 minutes, they would attempt something nobody had ever pulled off before. Thanks to Ukrainian partisan spotters, those 3 drone operators felt their phones buzz simultaneously with the aggregated message. The operators had fanned out to cover the 3 main routes the bird might take. One, eyeballing the M03 highway, another covering the northern farm roads, the third positioned near the southern river valley. Because missing this shot meant those assault troops would reach Ukrainian positions, thankfully, the Ukrainians could bank on this acoustic network that had been planted weeks earlier. The system communicated through LoRa, a long-range wireless protocol that sends tiny data packets up to 10 kilometers on less power than an LED light bulb. Perfect for battery-powered sensors that needed to hide for weeks in modified smartphones with external microphones stashed in everything from trash bins to fake rocks, each one listening for the distinctive low-frequency thump of helicopter rotors. When a helicopter flies overhead, each sensor records the exact millisecond the sound arrives. And since sound travels at 343 meters per second, the time difference between sensors reveals the chopper's position through triangulation. The Mi-8's twin turboshafts create a unique acoustic fingerprint at 20 to 40 hertz that cuts through fog and forest canopy where radar and visual systems choke. These sensors, powered by solar-charged batteries and communicating through the same LoRa network as the partisans, could track a helicopter's path to within 50 meters at 5 kilometers range. The system was essentially Shazam for military aircraft, listening to the sky and identifying threats by their sound alone. The first sensor detected rotor beats, a characteristic spike in the 35 Hz range. Within seconds, 2 more sensors confirmed it, their time difference calculations triangulating the bird's position to within 50 meters. The Ukrainian operator covering the M03 highway immediately launched his spotter drone, while the northern operator checked his acoustic sensor feed. Nothing yet on his route. The southern operator near the river began calculating intercept angles for all 3 possible paths, knowing they'd have seconds to react once the helicopter's direction became clear. The lead pilot checked his tablet, where acoustic sensors were already painting a picture. The morning air had formed a temperature inversion. Cold air trapped under warm, bending sound waves back toward Earth, like an atmospheric amplifier. The Mi-8's distinctive rotor beat would carry 5 kilometers instead of 2. 3 sensors were already triangulating its position. The helicopter was following the M03 highway at 150 kilometers per hour, 40 meters altitude, using visual navigation, because any radio emission would trigger Ukrainian missiles, and GPS was nothing but static from both sides' jammers. The mathematics of interception were brutal, but not impossible. The Mi-8 would stay low to avoid radar, follow roads to avoid getting lost, and maintain steady speed to conserve fuel. If the drone operators could predict its path and position their birds ahead of it, and if a dozen other variables went right and nothing went wrong, they might just make history. The lead operator reached for his primary drone, while the others began repositioning based on the acoustic data. The northern operator packing up to move south, the southern one holding position as backup, knowing they had perhaps 8 minutes to solve an equation nobody had ever solved before. The lead operator's primary Shrike 10 drone sat on the grass, a Frankenstein marriage of Chinese racing components and Soviet explosives that refused to consummate. The PG-7M warhead was connected to the flight controller through a piezoelectric trigger, essentially a lighter crystal that would generate voltage on impact. But during its several months-long storage, moisture had corroded the handmade connection. These weren't weapons from some defense contractor. They were garage-built munitions held together with zip ties and determination, where every solder joint was a potential failure point, and every battery connection a prayer to the electron gods. While he worked to fix the bird, the acoustic network was painting an increasingly urgent picture. Contact bearing 285 degrees, speed 150, altitude 40. The update came through his earpiece from the acoustic team, their 3 sensors constantly recalculating the helicopter's position based on rotor noise Doppler shift. The Mi-8 had turned off the M03 onto a dirt secondary road, still heading northwest at 150 kilometers per hour, now only 7 kilometers from Ukrainian forward positions. This wasn't the expected path. The bird should have continued straight on the highway, but something had spooked the pilot into taking the scenic route. The morning fog that had been patchy was consolidating into a wall rolling off the Dnipro River, swallowing everything below 60 meters. In 2 minutes, that chopper would be invisible to every sensor except sound, and sound alone wouldn't give them the precision needed for an intersect. The second operator, who had been covering the northern route, was already relocating his drone to a new intercept point when his controller disconnected. The cold had drained his remote battery to nothing. Cursing, he swapped in his backup battery pack wrapped in hand warmers, while the helicopter gained another kilometer. The backup drone was everything the primary wasn't: inferior battery life, shorter range, but most importantly, working. The 3S LiPo battery would give maybe 8 minutes of flight in the cold air that was already showing 6 degrees Celsius on his phone. The video transmitter managed 1 watt compared to the primary's 2 watts, meaning the signal would start breaking up at 5 kilometers. But Ukrainian engineering had a motto: if it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. He secured the faulty connection with superglue that would probably melt from motor heat, but might last long enough, then switched to the backup while precious seconds ticked away. The third operator was already airborne, racing toward a predicted intercept point when his video feed turned to gray static. Fog had swallowed his drone at 0618. Flying blind on instruments that didn't exist. Using only compass heading and mental math, he tried to maintain course while the fog created a whiteout condition. Water droplets don't just block visual light, they scatter infrared wavelengths and create acoustic shadows where sound bends around moisture pockets. For 90 seconds that felt like hours, his drone flew through milk soup while he stared at screens showing nothing but electronic snow. Acoustic has him bearing 290, turning more westerly. The voice in his earpiece updated, helping him adjust his blind flight path. Physics, however, doesn't lie when you know the constraints. The helicopter couldn't climb above the fog without entering radar coverage. It couldn't deviate from the road without risking collision with power lines that aren't marked on any Russian map. The acoustic team was now feeding constant updates, target speed steady, maintaining 40 meters, following the secondary road. They had him right where they wanted him. The lead operator launched his backup drone into the fog, flying cold enough to murder batteries. Through analog video beaming at 5.8 gigahertz, picked over digital because its 20 millisecond lag beat digital's 100 millisecond delay, watching combat looked like peering through a kaleidoscope stuffed with TV static. When milliseconds separate a kill from a miss, that 80 millisecond difference ain't negotiable. The other two operators had positioned themselves as backup insurance, their quads hovering at different spots along the road, ready to roll if attempt number 1 went sideways. Russians near the front line had caught the drone's telltale buzzing and radioed it in. Birds airborne, heads up. Meanwhile, the Borisovlebsk 2 crew was still hunting for the drone's control signal, like bloodhounds chasing ghosts, their spectrum analyzers lighting up with phantom signals across multiple bands. The Russians knew something was going down, but couldn't pin down the frequency-hopping spread spectrum transmission jumping across 50 channels per second. See, the Russians had gotten pretty good at jamming standard drone controls that camp on one frequency, easy as blocking a single radio station. But the Ukrainians had switched to Express LRS, which is like having a conversation while constantly bouncing between 50 different phone lines every second. By the time Ivan finds which line you're yakking on and tries to cut it, you that could punch through 300 millimeters of rolled steel armor like it was tissue paper. The Mi-8's aluminum skin, a laughable 2 millimeters thick, might as well have been tinfoil. Within seconds, the entire bird was swallowed in flames as it ate dirt in a field below. The spotting drone that had been maintaining safe distance swooped in hot and recorded the video you're watching right now, confirming the kill. The Russian electronic warfare vehicle, still trying to jam frequencies that weren't even there, wouldn't catch wind of the loss until the emergency beacon started screaming. By then, the Ukrainian drones were already ghosts, their operators packing up to bounce before Russian artillery started raining coordinates. A $500 drone cobbled together from hobby shop parts, guided by a partisan network that straight up outsmarted million-dollar electronic warfare systems, just pulled off what military brass called flat-out impossible. This wasn't luck or some Hollywood accident. This was garage engineering, mathematical prediction, and raw courage welding together in a chain that ended with the first confirmed FPV versus helicopter engagement in military history. The kind of moment that rewrites doctrine and makes generals rethink everything they thought they knew about warfare. Bye for now. on pure calculation toward where geometry insisted the helicopter must emerge. His battery showed 75% and falling faster than predicted. Cold air increases internal resistance in LiPo batteries. Behind him, the Russian Borissoglebsk 2 had detected the drone launch, its operators now actively scanning the spectrum, trying to isolate the control frequency. But the Express LRS system, an open-source drone control system that hops across frequencies up to 500 times per second, making it nearly impossible to jam because by the time you find its signal, it's already moved to a different channel. The Mi-8 burst from the fog exactly where they predicted at 0621 hours, still following that dirt road like a train on invisible tracks. The spotter drone confirmed visual, but celebration turned into calculation as the lead operator checked his battery. 60% remaining with 3 kilometers to cover. His drone maxed out at 100 kilometers per hour, while the helicopter cruised at 150. Chase was impossible, but interception, predicting where it would be and getting there first, that was just math. Hard math with no margin for error, but still math. The lead operator's bird touched down at the ambush point at 0623, power cells flashing 40% in angry red digits, counting down like a doomsday clock. He parked it 5 meters above a field beside the road, props barely spinning to save juice. Each percentage point now meant 7 seconds of flight time in air. Sledgehammer, spinning the quad in 3 axes while he fought to keep orientation through a video feed that was now more static than picture, more noise than signal. The closure rate was painfully slow, 50 kilometers per hour. The helicopter hauling ass away even as the drone climbed. But this operator had logged this move 10,000 times in simulators, threading racing quads through abandoned buildings where one screw-up meant hitting restart. Here, one screw-up meant history wouldn't get made. Those assault troops would reach Ukrainian lines. No pressure. The second operator watched through his drone's camera, finger on the trigger ready to take his own shot if the first attempt ate dirt, while the third maintained overwatch to document whatever went down next. From the drone feed, nobody could tell if the Russians ever clocked the drone coming. Might have seen it, might have been too focused on not flying into power lines. But what happened next? Crystal clear. Impact at 0625. The shaped charge detonated instantly, a copper jet punching through everything because the PG-7M warhead packed physics that hadn't changed since someone invented it decades ago, but stayed devastating as hell. At detonation, the Monroe effect kicks in, where a cone-shaped explosive cavity lined with copper morphs into a focused jet of molten metal, screaming faster than orbital velocity. 8,000 meters per second of liquefied copper, already hopscotched to a different one. To anyone trying to eavesdrop, it sounds like pure random static. White noise with an attitude. The electronic warfare geeks could sense something was there, like catching whispers in a packed stadium, but couldn't lock it down tight enough to jam squat. The sound reached the Ukrainians first through the acoustic network, that distinctive, synchronous beat of the Mi-8's 5-blade rotor chopping air at exactly 192 RPM, growing louder, but giving no precise distance in the fog's messy aftermath. 30 seconds out, the acoustic team called it, their triangulation now precise to within 50 meters, close enough for the government. The helicopter was running dark, no lights, no radio, essentially blind and deaf to electronic threats, which also made it equally blind to the drone chilling in its path like a patient spider. Then the sun punched through for a split second, catching the helicopter's canopy glass. That flash delivered position, altitude, speed, the whole damn package on a silver platter. The Mi-8 was 300 meters out, 40 meters altitude, 10 seconds from passing directly overhead. Its pilot eyeballing the road ahead instead of checking the one direction Soviet doctrine never taught them to sweat. Below, at 0624, the Mi-8 passed overhead, and the operator slammed his throttle forward, all 4 motors yanking maximum amperage as the drone climbed vertically straight into the helicopter's rotor wash, like swimming up a waterfall made of angry air. The turbulence smacked it like an invisible sledgehammer, spinning the quad in 3 axes while he fought to keep orientation through a video feed that was now more static than picture, more noise than signal. The closure rate was painfully slow, 50 kilometers per hour. The helicopter hauling ass away even as the drone climbed. But this operator had logged this move 10,000 times in simulators, threading racing quads through abandoned buildings where one screw-up meant hitting restart. Here, one screw-up meant history wouldn't get made. those assault troops would reach Ukrainian lines. No pressure. The second operator watched through his drone's camera, finger on the trigger, ready to take his own shot if the first attempt ate dirt, while the third maintained overwatch to document whatever went down next. From the drone feed, nobody could tell if the Russians ever clocked the drone coming. Might have seen it, might have been too focused on not flying into power lines. But what happened next? Crystal clear. Impact at 0625. The shaped charge detonated instantly, copper jet punching through everything because the PG-7M warhead packed physics that hadn't changed since someone invented it decades ago, but stayed devastating as hell. At detonation, the Monroe effect kicks in, where a cone-shaped explosive cavity lined with copper morphs into a focused jet of molten metal, screaming faster than orbital velocity. 8,000 meters per second of liquefied copper